These are rocks, smooth rocks, from a stream in the middle of the Valley of Elah. That's the site of the famous David versus Goliath. Now, when I was a kid, I thought this was about the size, but given what we know about slings and sling stones in the ancient world, probably closer to this. David's story, his rise to fame, is incredibly inspiring, and it seems at the beginning of his life that he's going to be the perfect king. He's contrasted to his predecessor Saul and to all of the earlier judges of Israel in terms of his faithfulness to God, and he becomes the archetype for the faithful Messiah. So it always puzzled me when you read the events of David's actual life. I mean, I'd always thought, David was a man after God's own heart. He's a man after God's own heart, so he has a heart like God's. There's even Bible studies called A Heart Like God's or A Heart Like His that you can do that tell us how to have a David heart, a heart like God. The problem is that David doesn't seem to have a very godly heart a lot of times. So how can someone who commits murder and adultery, lies to cover it up, and kills thousands of people, how can he be said to have a heart like God's? It's just never made sense to me. A few years ago, when I was considering my next move in ministry and thinking about doing a PhD in Old Testament, I went up and spent the afternoon with Dr. Daniel Block up at Wheaton College, and we talked about a number of things. He's incredibly warm, nice, as anybody who's ever met him can attest. And I asked him, because we were talking and the conversation eventually got around to the historical books and David, I asked him what he thought about the conclusion that I had come to, which was that the phrase, a man after God's own heart, is not actually an accurate translation of what the Hebrew text and the Greek New Testament recounting of the Hebrew text actually says. And it was really cool because he agreed and said, yes, that's actually what he had been teaching as well. That made me feel a lot better, as he's an incredible Old Testament scholar. And it's always nice when other people confirm things that you've had a hunch about in your own studies. In fact, I just finished reading his latest book, Covenant, and was pleasantly surprised to see the very point that we mentioned covered on page 320 of that book. So take a look at this clip from our course here at Disciple Dojo, Bible for the Rest of Us, and let's look a little closer at this question: did David have a heart like God's?
King David has always been known as a man after God's own heart. You want to be like David, a man after God's own heart. There's popular Christian Bible studies, even a heart like his, how to have a David-like heart and all this stuff. The problem with that, for me, has always been that when you actually read David's life, he starts off good, and then it's pretty much entirely downhill. And his life ends as a sad, pitiful tale of a king who was at one time so much promise and so much greatness, but whose life just nosedived through various compromise, through sin, basically. He broke many commandments. He didn't break the greatest commandment. To his credit, David as a king, the one thing that David never did that his son Solomon and that Saul, his predecessor, did, he never turned to other gods, or he never allowed the worship of other gods. He was always loyal to God as his God. So that's if some people said David he's a man after God's own heart, this is the Hebrew word for after his own heart or God's own heart. You read it this way to this way. It's kilvavo, and it's literally according to the heart of him. That's what David was. David was a man, kilvavo, according to the heart of him. Before we jump to what it means in English, to say in English the phrase so-and-so is a man after so-and-so's own heart means his heart is like this person's heart. And that's what you get in some Bible studies on David's life. David had a heart like God's, except when he was murdering, except when he was committing adultery, except when he was lying about his adultery and murdering to cover up his adultery. Those times he didn't have a heart like God's. There were other times as well. So what does it mean then? David has a heart like God's. Well, I want to suggest that phrase, a man after God's own heart, it means this. It means a man according to God's heart. In English, we have the concept of you have head knowledge and you have heart knowledge, right? Head knowledge is what you think. Those are the facts. Heart knowledge is what you feel. Those are the relational aspects. That distinction did not exist in the Old Testament. That is not a Hebrew way of thinking at all. In the Hebrew mindset, in fact, heart and mind and will are often the same. It's the same word. It's just the word heart. Your heart in the Old Testament is your inward desire, your inward decision, your inward choosing. Head knowledge and heart knowledge, same thing. It's all heart knowledge in Hebrew. So if you make a plan, that you'd say, well, I've planned this according to my heart. That just means this is my plan. This is my desire. This is what I want to happen. We see, for instance, 2 Samuel, and it's parallel in 1 Chronicles. They talk about, for the sake of your word and according to your will, you have done this great thing and made it known to your servant. This is just one of the, you can read this conversation that's happening. But that phrase, according to your will, that's the word, kilvavo. That's what gets translated in this section, according to your will. Some translations in 1 Samuel 13 translated as according to God's own heart. But it's the same term. So when we read in the New Testament, we find when it's describing the choosing of David, in fact, and it says, after removing Saul, he made David their king. God testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, and then NIV says, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. In Greek, in the New Testament, that is according to my heart, is what that says literally in Greek, according to my heart. So what's the point of all this? Well, David was a man chosen according to God's heart. That does not mean he was a man with a heart like God's. What it means was he was chosen according to God's inner desire, according to God's will, according to God's choosing. If you read the David story, he wasn't the tallest, he wasn't the oldest. He had nothing going for him that would make him a choice for king. In fact, when Samuel was anointing the son of, God said, go anoint the son of Jesse, Samuel looked at all the sons that Jesse brought out. Nope. Do you have any more? And he's like, well, this is little David. He's out in the field. Goes out. That's the one. God says, that's the one. Why? Because God uses the things of the world that do not seem like they would work to accomplish his plans. David was chosen not because of his stature. He wasn't like Saul. He wasn't tall and handsome. He didn't look kingly. You know how people say, oh, does this person look presidential? As if that means anything. He didn't look presidential. He didn't look kingly. But God says, doesn't matter. I look on the heart. I look on the inside. I look on something in there, and I'm choosing according to my own heart, according to my will, according to my plan. And I've got a plan of using the weak things of the world to shame the strong, of accomplishing great things through clay vessels, so to speak. So when you come to that, David, a man after God's own heart, doesn't mean David had a heart like God's. We know from his life that he didn't always have a heart like God's, and even a lot of the time he didn't have a heart like God's. But what he was loyal to God, and he was not what the world would expect in terms of a great king. And those two things were enough in God's plan because God was going to use that to accomplish his will. So we don't have to try to figure out how you can be a murdering adulterer and still have a heart like God's. You don't. If you're a murdering adulterer, your heart is not like God's. No matter how many prayers you pray, there's still a depth of sin that's there that is marring your life and has to be dealt with. After that, are you cleansed? Are you restored? Absolutely. And David wrote some of the most beautiful songs about forgiveness and about being restored by God after he confesses his sin. Unlike Saul, who would kind of pass the buck when confronted with his sin or make excuses, David didn't. He would just say, you got me. Like, yes, I'm guilty. And he would write from that. He would express. So, yes, David lived overall, you could say, he was a godly man, but he was a tragic godly man. His life could have been something so much greater than what it was because of the sin in his life. His family was a wreck. His son, the next generation, the dynasty collapsed. The sword did not depart from his house, as God promised, because he was a violent man. So as a father, he was a failure. As a king, he was a success. But none of that had to do with, well, he had a heart like God's. It was, no, he was somebody God chose. So if God could use David, then of course he could use anybody else. You know, that's how God works. He can use the lowest of the low. He can use even the biggest sinners in the world to accomplish great things. Remember what we said about Paul? Like, God can do that. But you don't get that from this phrase, a man after God's own heart. It's rather, a man after God's own heart means that David was a man chosen according to God's will, not according to man's. So this just emphasizes, again, the importance of the original languages. There are resources, even if you don't know the languages. There are 2 books I have, Hebrew for the rest of us, Greek for the rest of us. Now, these came out after Bible for the rest of us, so I should sue them. No, these are specifically using Hebrew tools without mastering biblical Hebrew, mastering Bible study without mastering biblical languages. I mean, these are written by the people who teach Hebrew and Greek in order to, they give you the ability, using resources and tools, which are all available online nowadays, they give you the ability to see these things, to look up words that go, what does that mean in the original Hebrew? I know it says this in this translation and this in this translation, which is what you should be doing, right? You should be having a base translation and then a word for word and a thought for thought, and that's how you do your digging. So you come across a word that stands out because it's treated differently in the translations, you go, I wonder what the original wording is. And then you go and you look up that word, and you can find it through whether it's websites like Bible Hub or Biblia or any of these. And then you can start to explore. You can start to dig. And there are tools like this that help you dig. So I'll leave these at the table after class is done if you want to take a look, and then you can, put them on your phone, Google them, go to Amazon, whatever. But I just want you to know that the tools are out there.
So if this piqued your interest and you'd like to dig a little deeper and see more about this and other passages in the Bible that may have been misinterpreted or misunderstood throughout history, then check out our course, Bible for the Rest of Us. It's available entirely free here at Disciple Dojo, and small groups can do it, individuals can do it, ministry teams can do it, Sunday school classes can do it. You don't need a group leader, just hit play, and then after the video, talk about what we talked about. It's really easy. Our curriculum here at Disciple Dojo is put together so that churches or ministries that are in need of deeper discipleship but don't have someone who has the time or the energy or the training to do that can have access to it no matter where they are around the world, as long as they have internet. If you're interested in supporting this teaching ministry and helping us grow, then for sure, like and subscribe to this channel. That is a great way to help us, but also consider becoming a monthly Dojo donor. Disciple Dojo is funded entirely by donations and people that believe in what we're doing to help equip, engage, and empower God's people to go deeper in their discipleship. So if that interests you, click the link in the description below and find out how you can help partner with us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.